Hey there, friends. How you doing today? We are looking today at the Bible Bistro University at Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 32. You can see I have it right here on the screen beside me. And so today, this is going to be our last installment in the Foundation series. And we're going to look at the 11th chapter of Genesis, which includes the end of the generations of Noah and the beginning of the fourth dispensation, which begins the story of Abraham. So the fourth dispensation would be called the patriarchal period. So they're going to now enter into the patriarchal period, but we have to go through a cataclysmic event. So let's just review. We had the generations of creation, and the cataclysmic event was the casting out of the garden, and the angels, the cherubim with the sword. Then we had the generations of Adam. And then during that period, men were growing and expanding and covering the face of the earth. Then we had a cataclysmic event, which was the flood. And then we had the generations of Noah. And generations of Noah, men are starting to replenish the world again. And now we come to the end of that third dispensation, the generations of Noah, and we're going to have a cataclysmic event, which is going to be the Tower of Babel. So, if you have your Bibles, you want to open to Genesis chapter 11. And if you don't, I have it right here on the screen, so you just watch as we go through this outline. And I've already set up some of the outline points in this presentation. So we begin with verse 1. Verse 1 says, "The whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there." So men are moving, but they're not moving around very much. They're moving a little bit, and they come east, and they find this plain. So the plain of Shinar, most folks believe that this is in the valley of the Mesopotamian area. The rivers of the Euphrates and the Tigris create a river valley, and they believe that this is where Shinar is located. And so they come there, and they're making their living. And they're, having babies, and they're building houses, and they're doing all the things that people do. And then we come to verse 3. "And they said," now notice this, they're speaking to each other. They're the ones talking here. And they're not talking about anything that's redemptive. This is all about them. "Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth." Now you see that this wisdom is against what God said. God wanted them to replenish the entire world. But they didn't want to. They didn't want to leave what they had. And that's understandable. We often rebel against the changes, right? We want to stay exactly where we are. We don't want to move. We don't want to go anywhere. We want to be just like we are, and we want to be great. And they wanted all those things. They wanted to be great. They wanted to have a name. They wanted to build a tower that reached into heaven. But you can't build a tower that reaches into heaven. And notice, it's not the heavens, it's heaven. So they thought they could climb up to God somehow. Or perhaps they thought they could climb up there and replace him. That would be even worse, wouldn't it? All right, so we have their desire. We have their words. There's nothing redemptive here. There's nothing about honoring God. There's no sacrifice. There's no worship. There's nothing here that helps us or is healthy or is soulish. It's all about feeding the ego, that we might have a name, that we might reach unto heaven, that we might build a city, that we might not be scattered abroad. So they didn't want to do what God had told them to do. Okay. So that's the council of men. You'll see that I have that mentioned. So you see if I have the council of men right here. That's the first point in our outline. Then we have the council of heaven. "The Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded." Now, this language, "he came down," is of course anthropomorphic. God does not have to come down to see something. He sees perfectly well from his place in heaven. He sees the whole earth at one time. He sees every man, every heart. He knows it all. He's in all places. He's omnipresent. So him to come down, this language is just poetic anthropomorphic language used by the writer to give us the idea of motion. This is the action that God is taking. He's coming down, he's condescending to see what men are doing. The Lord said, now he's going to speak. Here's the counsel of heaven, the Lord speaking. Behold, the people is one, they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them. Notice that. Let's stop right there in the middle here. Notice that nothing will be restrained from them. Why? Because they're unified under one language. And that kind of unity among men is very, very powerful, which is why the Lord had to break the language and scatter the men. Because if they had one language, they could do whatever they set their mind to do. There wouldn't need to be any translation. There would never be a lost text, because everything would be translatable. Everybody would know it. Everybody would be able to learn it. So he's going to do something to that. Nothing will be restrained from them. Go to, let us go down. Okay? Notice how similar verse 7 is to verse 4. The counsel of men was, go to, let us build a city and a tower. Now we have, go to, let us go down. Now, who's he talking to? Well, he's talking to himself. This is the Trinity. And so we had it in chapter 1. Let us make man in our image after our likeness. Now we have it again. Let us go down. There confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So only had to do one thing to break the unity that the men had, and that is confound the language. So all the language of the world, all the many different varieties, begin here. The roots of the different varieties begin here. Because over the centuries, of course, languages have changed. They evolve. They grow because men change and grow, and they go to different places and they learn different things. And so different words enter the vocabulary and they change over time. That's just the nature of language. But God confounds it. He takes it from one language and breaks it into many languages, which are the root languages here of all that we have in the world today. Because they're not able to understand one another's speech, then they're going to be restrained from doing whatever they want. He said nothing will be restrained from them, but once you take the speech away, once you take away the unity of one language, then something happens. It all falls apart. And you'll notice verse 8, and I have this highlighted in bold and underlined there in the text. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. So they gather in their little language pods, their little language groups, and they go off. Because remember what they said? They said, we don't want to be scattered abroad on the face of the whole earth, but the Lord wanted that. And so he's going to make sure that happens. He breaks the language, they're scattered, they go to their different places, and then what happens? The city is left off. They're not going to build the city anymore because they can't. They can't do it unless they're unified. And as I said, I've highlighted that and made it bold and underlined it because this is the place, this is the catastrophic event that ends that third dispensation. God scatters them, breaking the language into many, and they leave off building the city. So now they're scattered out. Therefore, it says there, notice in verse 9, therefore is the name called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them upon the face of all the earth. Notice who's doing the work here. The Lord is. It's called Babel because the Lord confounded the language. The Lord scattered them upon the face of all the earth because that's what the Lord wanted. He wanted them to go out and to multiply and replenish and fill the earth. Well, they didn't want that. So the Lord goes in and he takes away their greatest tool, one language, and he allows them to be scattered because now there are many languages. Now, the chapter, or the chapter is broken right here in verse 10, because in verse 10 we go from the scattering of men across the globe. Now we're going to look at another genealogy. And this genealogy is much more like the one in chapter 5. In chapter 5, we have the genealogy of Adam's generations. You'll notice how very much like that this is. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood, and Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. So you'll notice you have his age, how old he was when he had his boy, how long he lived after he had his boy, and the sons and the daughters that he had that are nameless. We just know that he had more. So the same formula as we find in chapter 5 is going to be used here. This is the generations of Shem. Now, we've already had a list of the generations of Shem. And so if you look through here, Arphaxad, Selah, Eber, but when we get to Eber, something's going to change. From Eber in chapter 10, we had Joktan. Joktan was the son that was followed. Now we go to Peleg. Now Peleg's going to be the son we follow, because from Peleg is going to come Abram. And so we're trying to connect the dots. We're connecting them all the way back to Adam. If you take chapter 5 and you take chapter 10 and chapter 11, we're going to find the line coming from Adam through Noah all the way to Abraham. So we know all those generations. But now, as I said, instead of Joktan, we're going to look at Peleg. Peleg begat Reu. Reu begat Serug. Serug begat Nahor. Nahor begat Terah. Terah begat Abram. And when we get down to Terah, you'll notice that we're going to look at his generations, because now we have the father of the first patriarch, Abram. And we're going to focus in on that one family. So we've narrowed our line now, right? We've come from Adam and all the men. Now we've come down through Noah, now through Shem, now to Terah, and we're going to be introduced to Abraham and Abram and Sarai, and then those two are going to have a family, and it's going to be that family that we follow that God enters into covenant with, and that family which becomes a great nation. So then we'll expand again, but that's later on in the Bible. So we have here, beginning in verse 26, the generations of Terah. Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran begat Lot. Haran died before his father in Terah, his father, land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, the father of Ishkah. But Sarai was barren, she had no. Now, we're going to find all these names come back again in Genesis chapters 25, 26, as Abram sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac. And where he goes back to Nahor. He goes back to the land of Padanaram, where Nahor lives. And so Nahor has children. And notice also that we have Lot introduced here. He is the son of Haran. And so Lot travels with Abraham. Notice verse 31. So Terah took Abram his son, Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So Terah, after his son that died in Ur, he names it Haran. They never get into Canaan. They never make it there. They're in the northern part of Mesopotamia, where not far from the area of Damascus, towards what would be the city of Nineveh. So they're up there in that region, and they never leave there. They found the city of Haran. Terah lives there, and you'll notice dies there as well. Sort of sad, really. He names a city after his son, and then he dies in that same place. They went forth from the land of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there, and were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So now we're going to leave off chapter 11 and go into chapter 12, and we're going to read about now the story of Abram as God calls him to go to a land that's not his own, to go and leave the place of his family, and he comes into this land, and God makes a promise to him. A promise that, ladies and gentlemen, is still in force. That's why these chapters are so important. Chapters 1 through 11 are so important, because all that is going to happen in the Scriptures, the promise to Abraham, which is still in force today. God has made that, and is the promise of Messiah, that in him all the families of the earth would be blessed. So there's so much here that we need to understand. That's why I took the time for us to go through this foundation series. These three dispensations are very important. It shows us all kinds of things. It shows us the grace and mercy of God, his judgment on sin, and yet in the midst of that judgment, he's merciful and loving kind to one man in that generation, Noah. It shows us his great power in that he made all things and he established all things, that he's in control of all things, that when men decide they're not going to do what God wants them to do, well, the Lord can just change that in a moment. So much here. I hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to some more of these Bible studies via screencast here in the Bible Bistro.